stop scrolling. Before this story begins, hit subscribe right now because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about intelligence, power, and prejudice in America. And if you believe in underdogs, hidden brilliance, and jaw-dropping twists that expose the truth behind money and ego, you do not want to miss stories like this one. Now here's the story. The night it all began was wrapped in polished glass and soft jazz inside one of San Francisco's most exclusive waterfront restaurants, the kind of place where CEOs ordered without looking at prices and power hummed louder than the conversations, and Marcus Hale, a tech billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers under headlines like "The Man Who Outsmarted Silicon Valley," leaned back in his chair with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been told no, watching the waitstaff move like quiet shadows when his eyes landed on Aisha Monroe, a black waitress with calm posture, natural hair, pulled back neatly, and a gaze that seemed sharper than her job required. And when a venture capitalist across the table joked about how global markets were impossible to understand unless you spoke Mandarin, Marcus laughed, swirling his whiskey, and said something that would ignite everything. Most people can't even order takeout in another language, let alone understand China. And when his guest gestured vaguely toward Aisha and smirked, Marcus followed the look and, with a grin that carried too much confidence, said, "I'd bet $500,000 she couldn't speak Chinese if her life depended on it." And the table laughed, not maliciously, just casually, the way powerful people laugh when they think the world is predictable. But what Marcus didn't realize was that Aisha had paused mid-step, having caught every word, not because she was offended. She had heard worse, but because the phrase struck something deeper, something buried beneath years of restraint. And when she turned around and politely asked, "Sir, did you say something?" the table went quiet, Marcus surprised yet amused, replying, "Nothing meant for you, just business talk." And Aisha nodded, smiling faintly, but then said in perfect, fluid Mandarin, "If you'd like to discuss China, I'd be happy to contribute." And the silence that followed was so complete it felt engineered, glasses frozen midair, eyes wide, Marcus's smirk collapsing into disbelief as he stammered, "What did you just say?" And she repeated it, this time adding a proverb about dragons and shallow rivers, her tones precise, her cadence native smooth, and something shifted in the room. Not applause, not laughter, but discomfort. The kind that creeps in when assumptions crack, and Marcus, recovering quickly, laughed too loudly and said, "Beginner's luck, memorized phrase." And then, because pride hates silence, he stood up and announced to the surrounding diners, "I'll put $500,000 on the table right now that she cannot hold a real conversation in Mandarin." And murmurs rippled across the restaurant, phones subtly raised, and the manager rushed over, sensing disaster. But Aisha, heart pounding yet steady, said quietly, "I don't have $500,000. And Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "You don't need it. If you win, I pay. If you lose, nothing happens." A deal that sounded generous but reeked of imbalance, and still Aisha hesitated, not out of fear but calculation, because this was not about money, it was about dignity, about the years she had spent invisible, about her grandmother who used to say knowledge was armor, and finally she nodded and said, "But we do it publicly." And Marcus agreed, certain of victory, unaware that Aisha Monroe was not just a waitress but a former linguistic prodigy who had grown up in Oakland in a household where struggle and scholarship coexisted, where her mother worked double shifts while her grandmother, a retired UN translator, filled their apartment with languages. Like music, teaching Aisha Mandarin alongside French and Swahili before she was 10, pushing her relentlessly, not for praise but for survival, and Aisha had gone on to study computational linguistics at Stanford on a full scholarship, publishing research on tonal pattern recognition that later quietly influenced speech-to-text algorithms used by companies Marcus himself had invested in. But life had twisted differently than Resumes predicted. Her mother's illness, medical debt, academic, politics, and a refusal to play certain games had left her brilliant, credentialed, and waiting tables while deciding her next move. And now, as the restaurant buzzed, Marcus snapped his fingers and called someone on FaceTime, a Chinese investor he claimed was a native speaker, putting the phone on speaker and saying, "Speak to her." And Aisha did effortlessly, discussing trade policy, idioms, regional dialects, correcting the man gently when he used a northern phrase incorrectly for the context, and the investor laughed in delight, praising her fluency, but Marcus frowned, waving it off. He's being polite. And then escalated, pulling out his phone and announcing he would live stream the challenge because humiliation, when you think you're immune, feels like entertainment, and within minutes thousands were watching as Marcus called in experts, professors, even an AI language assessment tool. Each test met not just with fluency but nuance, cultural references, classical poetry, business slang, and humor. Aisha navigating all of it like someone walking through her own living room, and the crowd grew, the story spreading across social media, headlines forming in real time. CO bets $500,000 against waitress, loses. But Marcus still resisted, his ego scrambling for escape, accusing her of cheating, of rehearsing, of having help, until one elderly Chinese couple approached. Diners who had been silent until now, and the man spoke to Aisha in a rare regional dialect nearly extinct, something unscripted, something raw, and she responded, tears welling as she mirrored his dialect perfectly, explaining that her grandmother had taught her because languages die when people stop listening, and the couple bowed to her, the restaurant erupting, and Marcus finally stood there, exposed, not ruined financially. $500,000 meant nothing to him, but stripped of the illusion that intelligence follows appearance. And he transferred the money publicly, applause mixed with shock. But the biggest twist came later, when investigative journalists dug deeper and discovered that Aisha had actually authored a paper years earlier that Marcus's flagship AI product had quietly licensed without credit through a shell company. Meaning the man who bet she couldn't speak Chinese had built part of his empire on her mind. And when confronted days later on national television, Marcus attempted damage control, offering her a job, a board seat, an apology scripted by PR teams, but Aisha declined, calmly explaining that the bet was never about money, and then announced she was using the $500,000 to launch an open-source language education platform for underserved communities, naming it Armor, honoring her grandmother, and the public response was explosive, donations pouring in, volunteers signing up, schools adopting the program, while Marcus's brand suffered not because he lost money, but because America saw something it couldn't unsee. The quiet brilliance that power overlooks, and in the end, Aisha didn't just win a bet, she rewrote the narrative, proving that genius doesn't always sit in corner offices. Sometimes it carries plates, listens carefully, waits patiently, and when challenged, speaks every language the world tried to deny it. And if the story made you think differently, if it surprised you, inspired you, or made you uncomfortable in the best way, that's exactly why you should subscribe, because the next story might change how you see everything all over again.